Isaiah 51. Isaiah 51. I was thinking about this chapter as I was finishing up and going, wow, it really seems like we hit rock bottom in this chapter and then come back up again. And then I was thinking, I feel like we've done that several times. That's sort of a pattern that God through the prophet takes Israel sort of to rock bottom and then picks them back up by demonstrating his mercy and kindness. But considering that we're headed into chapter 53, I think we are safe to say that we have definitely a crescendo in Israel's hope here in this chapter and in the couple of chapters to follow. So let's read chapter 51 together. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him. For the Lord comforts Zion. He comforts all her waste places, and makes her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Give attention to me, my people, and give ear to me, my nation, for a law will go out from me, and I will set my justice for a light to the peoples. My righteousness draws near, my salvation has gone out, and my arms will judge the peoples. The coastlands hope for me, and for my arm they wait. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and they who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will never be dismayed. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Fear not the reproach of man, nor be dismayed at their revilings. For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation to all generations. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies, of the Son of Man who is made like grass, and have forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth? And you fear continually all the day because of the wrath of the oppressor, when he sets himself to destroy. And where is the wrath of the oppressor? He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. I am the Lord your God, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. And I have put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand, establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth, and saying to Zion, you are my people. Wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drunk to the dregs the bowl, the cup of staggering. There is none to guide her among all the sons she has borne. There is none to take her by the hand among all the sons she has brought up. These two things have happened to you. Who will console you? Devastation and destruction, famine and sword, who will comfort you? Your sons have fainted. They lie at the head of every street like an antelope in a net. They are full of the wrath of the Lord, the rebuke of your God. Therefore hear this, you who are afflicted, who are drunk, but not with wine. Thus says your Lord, the Lord, your God, who pleads the cause of his people. Behold, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering. The bowl of my wrath you shall drink no more, and I will put it into the hands of your tormentors, who have said to you, bow down that we may pass over, and you have made your back like the ground, and like the street for them to pass over. What would you observe is the status of Israel in this chapter?
They're afraid.
They're what?
They're afraid.
They are afraid. Where's that from?
They're in verse 7. Do not fear the reproach of men,
Mm-hmm.
nor be afraid of insults. And then it goes on in 13 or down to 12.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you that you should be afraid of man who will die,
Mm-hmm.
the son of man who will be like the grass?
Yeah. Yeah. So they are a fearful people. What are they afraid of? You just read it, but
They're afraid of their oppressor.
they're afraid of the
One's coming
oppressors.
to trample on them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to destroy them.
Yeah. They're afraid of the oppressor.
Isn't that what he's warning them? Why be afraid of somebody who's going to die just like you?
Yeah.
You'd rather, fear God who can destroy both body and soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's the contrast God sets out, right? You guys are fearful, but you're fearful of man. Is that really worthwhile to be fearful over? Look at how transient, how man passes away, but God is sure and stable and strong, and so his virtues are extolled in contrast there. Any other things you notice about Israel's status?
He addresses them. I mean, we understand that they're not seeking the Lord in so many ways, and that's why the judgment is being promised.
Mm-hmm.
But every time he talks to them, at least in the early part of the chapter, he's calling them who pursue righteousness,
Mm-hmm.
The ones who seek the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So they know righteousness, verse 7. The law is in their heart.
Mm-hmm.
They, as much as we look at their rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
they still had a desire as God's people for God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just found that interesting in the address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a little bit hard to nail down like a singular audience who this chapter is addressed to. In other words, like you said, you do have people who are pursuing righteousness and have the law of God in their hearts, and yet they're called to look to God. So those are people who have some measure of responsiveness to the Lord and are seeking after him, and yet are also not complete and mature in that, right? And so they have to be called to it, and that's understandable. At the same time, you also have him addressing the nation kind of corporately, and they're going into judgment. So obviously the scales as a whole have tipped toward rebellion, strongly so, and for a long time.
I feel like he's addressing people who are not necessarily physically asleep, but several times he's saying, "Hey, listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Awake."
Mm-hmm.
And he'll repeat it. Awake,
Yep.
Awake.
Mm-hmm.
Wake up, people.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Wake up, particularly in verse 17. Wake up, wake up.
Drunkards, wake up.
Yeah.
Verse 9, verse 17, and verse 1 before we say,
Yep.
but isn't verse 9 actually Israel talking?
Verse 9 is a little bit different. Yeah. Yeah. So there's two calls for somebody to wake up, and it is different audiences in both of them. Yeah, those are good observations. Back up to chapter 50 real quick. And look at verse number 10, because obviously this is in a very close proximity context wise. It plays into chapter 51, right? The the chapter number doesn't mean it's a totally new topic, right? So what do we have in chapter 50, verse 10? Who among you fears the Lord and obeys the voice of his servant? Let him who walks in darkness and has no light trust in the name of the Lord and rely on his God. So we have some God-fearers addressed here, but people who are fearful and need to rely on God at the same time as he's speaking into a national situation where they're rebellious against God, and his disciplinary judgment in terms of the exile is near at hand, and it's spoken of as though they are in it and as though they're enduring that wrath at that moment, even though historically speaking it was still to come. So because he talks of them that way so that he can look forward to the end of it, which is their return, their restoration, and whatnot. So yes, we're doing good. We're making good observations here. They at least a remnant of them fear the Lord, and yet they need to trust him more. They are fearful, as Nancy pointed out. They're fearful of man, and they have to be encouraged not to be fearful of man. Right there in verse number 7. Fear not the reproach of man, nor be dismayed at their revilings. And what's the reasoning for why they don't need to fear man?
Even the little things are going to eat them up.
Yeah.
Moth and the worm.
A moth and a worm. Just the little things. Yeah. Normal decay is going to get rid of them, right? But what happens? But my righteousness will be forever, right? So the human beings, even if it's a nation that is persecuting them, is swiftly going to pass away. God's going to use them for his purposes, and they're going to pass away. They'll pass into memory or be entirely forgotten altogether. And yet God, what? His righteousness endures forever. My righteousness will be forever. And his salvation, how long does it last? For all generations. It is enduring. So yeah, they are fearful. Look at verse number 12. This is kind of interesting. As God says, I am he who comforts you. And that's a language that's been familiar in Isaiah. He's multiple times said that he is the comforter. In chapter 40, the servant is called to comfort my people Israel. And here God says that he is the one who comforts them. Look at the second line, at least in my Bible, it's the second line. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies? What's interesting about that line?
Kind of makes me think of what we find in the New Testament where it says, make your calling and election sure. What are you depending on?
There's a call to dependence, to depend on God. Look what it says, though. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies? When you say, who are you, what are you drawing out about the person?
They are in,
Pride. I think pride's involved.
they are in fact not a who. They're not significant. Who are you
Uh-huh.
to tell me that?
Uh-huh.
Who are you to fill in the blank?
Right.
I think it's
Those-
asking them to identify themselves.
Right, yeah.
What group do you belong to? You belong to that bunch over there who go their own way, or are you going to declare for God, I'm on the Lord's side?
That's a good point. I was leaning more.
Yeah, wouldn't it be a matter of you are my people,
Mm-hmm.
and I have called you out from the world.
Yeah.
It really seems to be a call, what you'd say, call to dependence, a call to faith,
Mm-hmm.
because what they can see and what they experience in the flesh
Mm-hmm.
makes it difficult to see what's in the spirit and looking to the promises.
Yeah.
As with all of us, there are immediate circumstances.
You think they fall in that category like Peter talked about? Where is the promise of his coming?
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I was leaning us a little bit of a different direction, but I think you're right. His call is one of identity. Who do you belong to? Because that's what it says in verse 13, right? You've forgotten the Lord, your maker, who stretched out the heavens and the earth. And so he's saying, I think you're right. He's saying, you belong to me. So you need to, who are you? Who do you belong to? What is your identity? And the fact that you're fearing man is in contrast to who you should properly be looking to, right? Why are you afraid of man? That they're insignificant. They're powerless over you. You belong to me. I am your Lord. I am your master. Remember me.
And he just got through telling me the olden days. Remember what happened? What was it? Numbers chapter 6 or Deuteronomy 6, where his fathers teach your children. Tell them about these things that happened, how God has brought us to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Every generation, make sure so they don't forget these things or remember and know who got them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
They've forgotten.
Yeah, you have to have your eyes fixed on God and have to be reminded of it, and it has to be passed on. So yeah, along with being fearful, they're forgetful, but they're also oppressed. They're in a situation that is difficult. There's nations that are set against them, and so they are in a difficult spot, and yet they're not supposed to be in fear of the oppressor primarily. That may be their circumstances at the moment, but that's not supposed to be where their attention is or what distracts them from the Lord. If you look at verse 17, they're fearful and they're forgetful and they're oppressed. And the oppression is because the nation is under the disciplinary judgment of God. When he calls them to wake up, he uses this imagery of drunkenness, in that they have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath. And that's Old Testament and New Testament language of wrath being poured out like a cup, where you drink of the cup of wrath. And so they are drinking of the cup of God's wrath. And what's that do to them? It leaves them like helpless and bewildered, and because the imagery is all drunkenness. You have drunk of the wrath, now you're drunk. You're stumbling around with no one to help you. So they're under the disciplinary judgment of God, and it's severe. He says, let's see. They're severely afflicted by God's wrath. It's called a cup of staggering. There's no one to help them, no one to console them in verse 19. There's devastation and destruction and famine and sword. Who will comfort you? So they are in a bad spot, physically speaking. So I think we're getting a little bit of a picture of Israel in the chapter, what's going on with them. But back up again and kind of scan through the chapter again. What are some imperatives that we have? And Missy's already pointed us towards some of them. But what are the imperatives? Listen.
He said, look, listen, awake.
Mm-hmm. Look to the rock in verse 1 still. Look to Abraham and Sarah. Give attention. Give ear to me. Listen.
There's these, I guess, was talking to a remnant.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to remind them, said, listen, Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90, well past childbearing years.
Mm-hmm.
But look what I did for them. I brought out an entire nation.
Right.
So just because you're a few right now doesn't mean I can't multiply you just like I did then.
Yep. And that one it's a call to their heritage to go, look, I took Abraham, who was just one dude, and made of him a great nation. You think I got you right now? I think we can handle it, right? I think I can handle it, he says. Keep scanning through. What are some more imperatives there?
Fear not.
Fear not is in there. Yep. Yeah, lift up your eyes to the heavens. Missy mentioned already verse 17. Wake yourself, stand up. And then 21, hear this, you who are afflicted. Listen to the Lord. Now, what we want to note is that primarily these imperatives are not works in the sense that they're a call to effort. They're not even really a call to righteous behavior, because what are they? They're things like look and listen and trust and hear. They're they're calls to trust, basically, if we were to boil it down. Calls to trust in something outside of themselves, right?
And
So-
Abraham's, an example of Abraham, he wasn't saved by his actions because he wanted to do it his own way, or
Mhm.
he didn't trust in God
Mhm.
giving him a child. And so it was through faith
Mhm.
that God saved Abraham.
Mhm.
It's the same with them, not by what they're doing, but who they are.
Yeah, yeah. It's looking back to Abraham is looking to faith, right? The principle of faith that unites them to God, and the essence of these imperatives, listen and look and hear and everything, it ends up making God the hero of the whole thing, right? He's the hero of the whole thing. Let's back up and scan through these imperatives again and note how they flesh out. So in chapter 1, listen to me, you who seek to the Lord, look to the rock. They're supposed to look basically back to the bottom of their family tree. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, to the quarry from which you were dug. Observe your heritage. What's their heritage? Well, there was Abraham and Sarah. What do we know about them? They were old. She was barren. They weren't supposed to have any children. And what does God say? He was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and what? Multiply him. So he takes one guy, Abraham, out of Ur of the Chaldees, and makes him promises. And one of those promises is you're going to be a great nation, which means what? A miracle has to happen, right? And he did. He multiplied him. And so what does God do? Well, it's the Lord who comforts Zion. He can take care of them. He comforts all their waste places. And it goes on to describe blessings. We're going to come back to those blessings. So here's just a call to look back to their spiritual heritage, to trust in the same Lord, because it's that Lord who will restore them with joy and gladness. In verse number 4, give attention to me, my people, give ear to me, my nation. For a law will go out from me. I will set justice for the light to the peoples. My righteousness draws near. My salvation has gone out. My arms will judge the peoples. So there's an appeal to give attention, but why? Because it's God who's the one who's going to set everything right. He is the one who brings salvation and justice. And in fact, that salvation and justice is described again as being extensive, right? All over the world. He's a light to the peoples, to more than just Israel.
He's even said it's not too late.
Mm-hmm.
Even in what's coming, it's not too late. Salvation.
Verse number 6. Lift up your eyes. But what are they lifting their eyes up to? Well, they're called to observe that the heavens and earth, they can wear out like a garment. The stuff that we, from our perspective, would view as the most permanent and stable that there is, from God's perspective, is it can disappear from his perspective. The heavens can vanish like smoke. But what about his salvation of people? Well, his salvation is forever, and his righteousness will never be dismayed. His salvation and his righteousness are eternal. Verse 7, listen to me, fear not, he says, because the people, the oppressor, will pass away. But again, God's righteousness and salvation are for all generations. It's interesting, we have righteousness and salvation repeated in here a couple times. Skip ahead to verse 17. This imperative, wake up, wake yourself up, stand up, O Jerusalem. And the context here is you have drunk of the cup of God's wrath, which means it's done. His wrath reaches a point of termination, and they've drunk of it. And then what does he do after that? He restores them and turns the wrath on their enemies. He describes their drunkenness, but once we get down to verse number 21, he says, therefore hear this, you who are afflicted, who are drunk, but not with wine because he's allegorizing, right? They're drunk with oppression, with persecution, with the exile, with God's wrath. Thus says the Lord, your Lord, the Lord, your God, who pleads the cause of his people. He takes up their case. So it is his wrath, but then what? He takes up their case. He pleads their cause. And then look, behold, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering. The bowl of my wrath you shall drink no more. Like, it's done. We took care of it. His discipline against them doesn't last forever. And he takes the cup of wrath away. And then what's he do in verse 23? I'll put it in the hand of your tormentors. So be encouraged. I will act. I'm not going to judge you forever, and I'm going to act in justice on your oppressors. I will deal with them. I'll give them the cup of wrath. So wake up, pay attention, listen to the good news that God takes up their case, and God's judgment will reach a point of completion, and then it will turn on the oppressor. So all these imperatives really are rooted in promises, right? They're just a call to trust God and to see what he will accomplish. Back up again. We're just scanning through the chapter a couple times, observing different things. So in light of the fact that God is the one who is the hero here, what are the promises that he gives them? Verse 3, what's this promise look like?
The desolation that was there, he's going to reverse it.
He's going to reverse their desolation.
Joy and gladness will be found, thanksgiving in the voice of song.
So it seems like it's towards the land and the people.
Flesh that out just a little bit.
That he comforts by restoring the wastelands, the desert-like garden of the Lord, but also from the people, they will be filled with joy and gladness and thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's a restoration, complete restoration.
Yep. He promises to set Israel in this beautiful place, like the garden of the Lord, which tells me, like, I don't think this has happened yet.
Right.
Right? It seems to be still future.
I'm just trying to make some connection between Acts when Peter was preaching. He told them, repent and be baptized. And he talks about the times of refreshing.
Yep.
Those things that are promised from the Old Testament could come to pass then. When Israel is called out by the Lord.
Right.
That's going to, I think, it's one of those things you meditate on. I think, the Methuselah, lived to be 969. Something happened to his genetics or whatever, as they progressed along, shorter lifespan. God, during the millennium, was going to reverse all that. It'll be like it was in the days of the garden.
Yeah, you'll be young if you're 100. Yeah.
I wonder, I'm thinking about Israel's restoration even now. Remember Mark Twain visited Israel and he
Yeah, Innocents Abroad.
This is a desert.
Yeah.
It's a wilderness. Who would want to live here?
Mhm.
And Israel has been restored to a certain extent. They have the most brilliant scientists, the best doctors in the world. They export more fruits and things, than any other nation. This little tiny land of Israel.
They've invented ways of
The water system.
that's what I mentioned. They have ways to irrigate that doesn't waste water. They come up with a desalination thing to produce water from the ocean.
Right.
Every time you look around, And this looks like if it continues on, this is going to cure cancer. And I mean,
They have lots of blessings,
yeah, they
right?
sure do.
Yeah,
And it's,
yeah.
and
But
and they don't hold it to themselves. They say,
Mhm.
you know, here, the rest of the world, you can partake of this.
But the transformation here is like a whole nother level, right? This is like the Garden of Eden, it's described as. And as Pastor Matt mentioned, there's this inner like rejoicing, like they're rightly aligned to God, where they're full of joy and gladness and thanksgiving and the voice of song. So there's this inner restoration, this idyllic happiness that God gives them.
It seems though, I think it'd be fair for us to consider the readers of this original writing, the people that Isaiah was writing to at that time. This was a call, like we had talked in previous chapters, a call for a long look.
Mm-hmm.
Because they haven't even reached the Babylonian captivity.
Yeah.
They were going to be facing some, so he was calling them to look to the promises of God that they may never ever realize.
Uh-huh.
Almost as though they'd be written about in Hebrews chapter 11.
Uh-huh.
It's that whole idea of trusting God, even though it doesn't, even though it seems like it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Even though we feel like we've been abandoned, even we deserve it. We deserve God's chastisement.
Mm-hmm.
But did God abandon us? And he said, no,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't. But
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen, but probably not in their lifetime.
Yeah. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the way you just phrased it, it's a call for a long look.
Right.
It was good because that's super practical, right?
Yeah.
We live in that space where we have to have the long look.
Yeah, when Paul talks about why in the world would I suffer
Mm-hmm.
if there is not an expected outcome
Mhm.
in eternity?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you be baptized for the dead if you didn't think they're going to be resurrected?
Exactly.
What point would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like in right, 1 Corinthians 15, where we are in the main service. Yeah.
Paul also sees that same thing in Romans 11. It says there's going to be a remnant.
Mm-hmm.
God cast Israel aside? Definitely not. I'm
Mhm.
one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, and like Paul wrote, like 1 Thessalonians, he said, we which are alive and remain, we're going to be caught up. You know, that's that thing that is somewhere there in the future. We don't know where.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if God had told us where it was, we would not do anything until right at the moment we thought he's going to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where the sense of imminency, it transforms how we live, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So it seems to address the whole of human nature, even those of us whose law, on whose hearts the law is written, that we are bent towards short-sightedness.
Mhm.
We are.
Mhm. Two other passages just briefly from Isaiah, chapter 40, 1 and 2. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. And then chapter 35, verse 10, the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So that's the future hope. Okay, so the Lord is the one who comforts them with this future hope. Part of that hope is that righteousness will prevail. They're said to be seeking righteousness in verse number 1. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness. In verse 5, God says that he's the one who brings righteousness near. My righteousness draws near. My salvation has gone out, and my arms will judge the peoples, the nations. In verse 6, he says that his righteousness is never broken. My salvation will be forever. My righteousness will never be dismayed. And so that's supposed to give them rich encouragement in the middle of their sufferings, that righteousness will prevail, that the evildoers will only last for a little while. And then God, he's the one who sets things right. And when he does it, he will set them permanently right. There will be enduring righteousness. And so the persecutions that they face, the exile that they face, And we believe that this full restoration hasn't happened yet. So whatever sufferings they endure, we could extrapolate it out through the Holocaust or whatever sufferings they endured were just temporary, but God's righteousness would be brought in eternal measure. And that fits right in with what you're talking about with us, right? Because we're called to endure suffering, to endure trials. Why? Because we look to something bigger, grander in the future, when God is the one who sets things right and real righteousness is established. That gives us hope, that gives us joy, that gives us peace, that gives us the reminder that we don't have to set things right. That's the basis by which Jesus can go, hey, vengeance is mine. Like, you don't have to worry about it. I'm the one who sets everything right. So we trust in him. Verse 11, the ransomed are said to return. The ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. Gladness, joy, sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So we covered that one already a little bit.
Do you know that song now? Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return and come and sing unto Zion. An everlasting joy shall be upon their heads.
Nope, I don't, but I'm glad that you do.
When we get to Isaiah 53, there's a song in that chapter also.
Do you know the chapter 53 one? You might need a reminder.
No, but I can finish.
Mike's gonna sing the one from 53 when we get there. So yeah, they're going to return to Zion with joy and gladness. Sorrow and sighing will pass away. And then there's these eternal promises in verse number 12 and following. I am he who comforts you, he says. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies, or the son of man who is made like grass, and have forgotten the Lord your maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth? You fear continually all the day because of the wrath of the oppressor when he sets himself to destroy. And where is the wrath of the oppressor? He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. I am the Lord your God, who stirs up the sea so its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. And I have put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand, establishing the heavens, laying the foundation of the earth, and saying to Zion, you are my people. So they are in suffering, but what? God has moved with permanent and unshakable purpose on their behalf. He is the actor here. He is the one who upholds them. And there are three things that are said that can't be moved. In verse number 16, he says, hey, I'm the one who established the heavens. Now, the perspective has to be a little bit different, right? Because a few verses back, he just said the heavens could pass away, but his words weren't. And so the imagery has to be that this is the things that we see as being permanent. And he's going, those things that are most sure, I'm the one who put them there. I'm the one who established the heavens. I put down the foundations of the earth. I'm the one who said, you are my people. And the point in this verse is, that doesn't change, right? So he said it, it must be, it cannot fail. You are my people, he says to them. And so this unshakable belonging gives them a sense of security. They can go in the midst of whatever trial, and they could be being drugged to Babylon and be going, I belong to God. He is the most sure thing. My belonging to him transcends whatever I can see right now or whatever difficulties I may be in. He hasn't left. Remember, we covered that in the last chapter when he goes, where's your bill of divorce? Show it to me. Show me where it said, I left you. It's not there. Their sin was bringing discipline, but God is faithful. You are my people. There are two calls, backing up again, scanning through a few things. There are two calls in the chapter to awake with two different hearers. In verse number 9, this seems like this is either the prophet speaking, or it might be the prophet putting himself as the voice of the remnant of Israel. But whatever it is, it's someone calling out and making a strong appeal to the very power of God to move on their behalf, which is what he says that he's doing. And yet they express this plea to the Lord. So the prophet or the remnant calls out to God and says, "Awake, awake, O arm of the Lord." And when you anthropomorphize Jesus with his arm, what's the point? Like he's acting with strength, right? He's on the move. It's a symbol of, I read that it was a symbol of divine military power. And here the arm of the Lord is personified and told to arouse itself from sleep and prepare to act on behalf of the people of Israel. So this call for the arm of the Lord to act on their behalf is rooted in how he has acted before. It's an appeal that is reflecting back to how he has acted in power on Israel's favor in their history, these mighty acts. So they're going, "God, we need you to act in a big way on our behalf." And they say, "Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces and who pierced the dragon?" That's a little bit confusing, but in Isaiah, Rahab is symbolic of Egypt. And I'm not just making that up. In chapter 30, verse 7, it's explicitly said that Egypt is personified as Rahab. So the speaker here is going, "God, wasn't it you who squashed Egypt with the plagues? Showed himself powerful over Egypt. Was it not you who dried up the sea?" Hearkening back to the Red Sea, right? This climactic moment in their history where they saw the power of God operating on their behalf. "You dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over." And so the appeal is for him to act in that same way with great power. And then that's where it said that the ransomed of the Lord shall return. So this mighty act of God where he restores the nation and plants them in the land and gives them everlasting joy. It's going to be dramatic.
In verse 9, that thing of Rahab and wounding the dragon, is that a Hebrew parallel? Referring both to Egypt and both of those?
Yeah, the Rahab and the dragon refer to Egypt. Yeah. Yep. And like I said, chapter 30, verse 7 actually says that really clearly. So
That's the Hebrew way.
that the Rahab,
I mean, it's stated, then
Uh-huh.
restated, just a little different, but they're talking about the very same thing.
right. And I guess I didn't check into the dragon, but Rahab clearly connects to Egypt. And yeah, it seems like it's just sort of two parallel lines. Yep. Where was I? Okay, so he's the one who has acted in the past, and so they call on him to act in the future to return Israel to Zion with joy and gladness. So there's the first awake, this call for the Lord to act powerfully. And then the second awake is not a call for someone to act powerfully. It's just a call for them to trust in God. The second wake in verse 17. "Wake yourself, wake up, stand up, O Jerusalem." So this is a call to Jerusalem, and this is a call from the mouth of God. He is the speaker. And it's a call of pure grace. Stand up, I'm going to act for you. Again, the description is that they have drunk the cup of God's wrath. And so his judgment has been dealt out, and they have been absorbing that wrath, and they're devastated under that wrath. It's a cup of staggering. There's no one to guide her. And this isn't an imagery of drunkenness that's silly, like Otis the Drunk in the Andy Griffith Show, right? This is an image of drunkenness that's more realistic, that it devastates a person. They have no faculties, their senses are dulled, they are foolish and acting in humiliating ways. And so Israel has drunken this cup of wrath from God, and it has devastated them. There's no one to guide her. They don't even have someone to lead them around because they're just drunk with this wrath. They have no comforter. And it says that their sons have fainted and lie at the head of every street. So their family is just an embarrassment. They're full of the wrath of the Lord and the rebuke of your God, which is a bad spot for the nation to be in, right? But there's a therefore, right? Considering that you're helpless and that you're suffering, verse 21, therefore hear this. Wake up and listen to this, you afflicted ones who are drunk but not with wine. Thus says the Lord. Thus says your Lord, the Lord, your God, who pleads the cause of his people. Notice like his personal connection with them is unsevered, right? I'm your God. Specifically, he says, your Lord, Elohim, your master, the Lord, Yahweh, his personal name. I'm your God, and God steps in. He pleads the cause of this people who are totally helpless.
I watch it. I'm almost embarrassed. I like watching fights, boxing, UFC. You see the guy hit him. He don't know where he sat around. The second comes in and tries to help him back to his stool. He don't know where he is. He's knocked senseless. Mm-hmm. Israel's at that stage. They've been battered and beaten and in every way, and yeah. Now they're just trying to get back to the corner.
Yeah. It's a messy spot. The imagery is graphic. Like, you don't want to be the drunk guy laying in the street with no one to help you, right? But that's exactly the point. Is at their point of absolute helplessness, God steps in and goes, I plead your case. I plead the cause of my people. So he's inclined toward them. Like, he is reaching out and benevolent toward them. He lifts them up. His desire is to rescue and to uphold them. And he takes from them the cup of wrath. Like, I'm going to take that cup of alcohol, that cup of what is destroying you, and I'm going to put it over there on your oppressors. They're going to deal with my wrath. We'll deal in justice with the tormentors, and I will plead your cause. I'll take that judgment away. And it continues on. The thought really flows right into chapter 52. There's another call to awake, but we'll pick up with that next week. But at the end of the day, God's the hero. Like, Israel is devastated, and God is the hero. He steps in. He pleads their cause. He's the only one who's ever going to set them right at all. And when he does, it's great. Like, the final salvation, the restoration in the millennium, and then into the eternity is perfect righteousness and peace and joy and happiness. Like, it's beautiful, both physically and spiritually speaking, as they're restored to God. And we anticipate that as well. So we do need to close. Our God, we're really glad that you're the hero, because we know in our own sin, we are just as foolish and lost as Israel. Even perhaps like a drunkard, unaware of how bad off we were. And yet you have stepped in on our behalf, and we're so thankful for that. Thank you that we see again and again that your promises to Israel are unbroken, and we depend on that same faithfulness ourselves. But thank you for making us your family. So may we encourage and edify the saints as we're gathered this morning. Use us to do your will, because you've bought us to be your own. We belong to you. So use us even in this next hour to glorify you as we sing and listen and pray, and to edify and build up the saints. May we seek you above all things. In Jesus' name, amen.